for this evening's program with the United Nations Association of St. Louis and Just Moms STL. I want to thank everyone for participating this evening, and we're really excited to hear from Dawn and Karen of Just Moms STL. And just before we get started, to introduce this evening, I have a quick presentation, but so again, welcome. And my name is Carlos Suarez. Serve as the president of the United Nations Association of St. Louis. And this year is also a remarkable year for our organization because it marks 60 years of our local chapter. We are formally established in 1961. So we're celebrating 60 years in 2021. So we're excited for all the activity that we have going on and to further our mission. And speaking of our mission is dedicated to educating, inspiring, and mobilizing Americans to support the principles and vital work of the United Nations and its agencies. And a common hashtag that we use across the board is USA for UN to support its work. So having discussions like this evening and advocating for the United Nations and strong US leadership at the UN is a key component to our advocacy, and bringing global issues that are happening here locally are dear to our heart. And part of those global issues include the global goals for sustainable development, or the 17 sustainable development goals, also known as the SDGs. As you can see here, is from ending poverty to taking action towards climate change, reducing inequalities, and good health and well-being, and very relatable to the discussions that we're having here this evening. Also coming up this summer, we have our SDG Changemakers Youth Action Program for high school students from July 12th through the 23rd, taking place at Cortex Innovation Community and at partner locations. You can check out more information at una-stl.org/changemakers. And actually the deadline is June 1st. But for any high school students that are looking at what it means to be a change maker for the sustainable development goals here with a local context, we invite high school students to apply, and we do have a limited number of scholarships available. And you can follow us online on our social media channels, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also we're on YouTube with our YouTube channel. But here this evening, we have special guests, Dawn Chapman and Karen Nickel with Just Moms STL. And I want to also thank our advocacy committee, which is being led by Pam Greer-Hibler, and also Stephanie Gavin with her work for tonight's program, as well as Savitri, Bruno, and Adam, and Ashley as a part of the committee. And also special thanks to Civitas for their sponsorship for this evening's program. A great gratitude to Civitas. So I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie to move on with the program.
Thank you, Carlos. And thank you guys for joining us. This is quite a news day of positive news for a change, and a step in the right direction for human rights for all, and certainly for police accountability. So I'm glad that you have taken some time away from the news to join us here, because we do have some great guests. And some of you may not know that St. Louis played a role in the production of the first atomic weapons. And Mallinckrodt Chemical Company actually purified the uranium for the atom bombs used in World War II. And that process created thousands of barrels of toxic waste. And that waste is in the Westlake landfill near the airport. And Dawn Chapman and Karen Nickel for years have been advocates for the community, because this waste is an issue. It's toxic, it smells terribly, and there's a burning landfill near it. So there are some dire circumstances that they've been fighting for a long time, and they're here to give us an update on that. So we are really excited, Dawn and Karen, to have you this evening. Welcome.
Karen, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, sorry, Dawn.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Sure. So I'll just give you a little bit of background, and then we'll just move right into what is happening at the landfill. As Stephanie mentioned, the role that Mallinckrodt played with the atomic weapons, that waste from making those bombs was left and highly disrespected by the federal government and allowed to seep into Coldwater Creek in North County. The creek is 9 miles long, and it has had the potential to flood many areas, including people's yards and homes. That was where I grew up as a child. And my parents had no idea that their children were being poisoned by radioactive waste materials. Fast forward 2012, I learned about this, and I attended a meeting that the Army Corps of Engineers was hosting for the cleanup that they had been doing in North County and Mallinckrodt and also Coldwater Creek. And that's kind of where I learned about the Westlake landfill. I had no idea that I had been living 1.8 miles away from Westlake, raising my own 4 children now for the past 20 plus years. Also learned at that time that the landfill was experiencing an underground fire. At the time, it was said to be about 1,200 feet away from the known radioactive materials. Great concern that the fire was moving towards that radioactive materials. It was a little bit of chaos because agencies weren't speaking with each other, had no idea who was doing what. And in 2013, I met Dawn. I had already created the Westlake Landfill Facebook group, but I met Dawn in 2013 at an air sampling event across from the landfill. And we have been together ever since, fighting the good fight. There was a decision at that time to cap and leave the waste in place. Some organizations fought against that. And so the EPA put that record of decision on hold. 2012, when I found out, and then Dawn, we fought to get that record overturned. And we were successful to now that the EPA in 2018 released their record of decision to remove 70% of the overall radioactivity. I am going to turn it over to Dawn so she can speak a little bit about that.
So, as Karen mentioned, when we jumped into this, it was just absolute chaos. We did not have any experience as Just Moms dealing with agencies. Some of these agencies like EPA, that's Environmental Protection Agency, we didn't even know what that stood for. Our DNR, Department of Natural Resources, to us, it was really scary how many of these agencies whose mission is to protect us knew absolutely nothing about what was going on in our community. We would sit there and we would have documents in our lap showing how close the fire was to the radioactive waste. Currently, as of right now, it's about 600 to 500 feet, depending on whose map you believe, whether or not you believe the state's map or you believe the Republic or other maps. But we were looking at this and we just could not believe that, we had a document in our hands that a federal agency whose responsibility it was to oversee this waste didn't have. So a lot of what we did was educating. We ended up going to all sorts of elected officials' offices, from state representatives to mayors, to our federal offices, Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Senator Roy Blunt, Senator Claire McCaskill, and Congressman Lacey Clay, because we were trying to get them to advocate for us. We would put these documents on their desk and show them just how dangerous the site was. And even they were taken aback. And so they would, on behalf of us, make phone calls and, try and get the story straight from agencies. And of course, it was never good news, and then they would come back. And at some point, I think they realized, just like we did, that we had a very dangerous situation that was quickly escalating. And it did take us from 2013 to 2018, so 5 years to actually get the EPA to even come out with a decision that this radioactivity had to leave our community. You know, even after they understood and acknowledged that it had already gotten in the drinking water, you know. So for us, it was a victory, but it was also a half victory because so much damage has been done to our community and the site and the groundwater underneath the site, the extent of which is still being investigated, that, you know, it's kind of like the verdict today, right? I mean, you can celebrate a good verdict, right? But then somebody still lost their life. And it's the balance of hope, right? Because it's setting a precedent for other communities. And there's the hope that perhaps we, through our story and doing events like this, can make sure it doesn't happen to another community. But as far as our community goes, you know, our expectations have to be more realistic, which is we are going to be able to make this lower the risk at the site, but we are never going to be able to fully put it back the way it should have been, and certainly not what this community deserves. And I think for us, if I had to pick the most heartbreaking lesson of all, that would probably be it, that we are a living example. And I think St. Louis in general, that sometimes we make mistakes, humans make mistakes that are so awful, the consequences of which we cannot fully reverse. And especially when you're talking about environmental situations, you know, it's so important to point out, and I think COVID has highlighted that there are still things that science can't solve, right? And that, you know, the best engineers in the world can only make a situation, you know, a little bit better in some circumstances. And, you know, we take that story with us now, Just Moms. We're working with a lot of other communities across the nation. We've been fortunate. We are 2 white cis females to have we realize now, a really decent sized platform. And it took us a while to build it. And I can only imagine, you know, because as we go into these other communities with a lot of, you know, our Indigenous friends and a lot of our Black and Brown friends, you know, they don't have that platform. And to build that platform is so much more difficult for them. And so what we do is we try and lend them our platform, and we don't speak for them. We let them use their own voice, because one of the things Karen and I learned is that no matter how similar our story is to another community, their experience is their experience, right? We still have no right to go in and speak. They need to be allowed to tell their own story and empowered to share their own experiences. So that's where we are right now. We are working closely with Congresswoman Cori Bush's office to hopefully get some more environmental things done, get some more funding for EPA for the Superfund program. That's a huge thing on our list. You know, possibly reinstate the polluters pay tax so that these other sites across the nation where situations where the polluter has gone bankrupt, there would be money there that the government can spend and clean their community. And so especially the abandoned uranium mines on many reservations in indigenous tribal lands. So that's kind of where we are. We are also working very, very hard to investigate the extent of the groundwater at the site. And I would say on a federal level, we have a new administration, and we have made a lot of contacts behind the scenes with people that work in upper level DC EPA. And we're just hoping that they will be able to continue to focus on this, as well as other agenda items that they have put on their platform. We think there's room for them, and that they have the bandwidth to continue to address these other sites throughout the nation.
I'd also like to add locally, there was a Bridgeton settlement fund that came from litigation against Republic Services for environmental violations that was settled back in 2019, Dawn? 18, 19, 20, 18.
Yeah.
And there was money allotted to this community to be used for health, environment, and safety. Dawn and I, they have granted a lot of these funds already, and Dawn and I have been active in trying to get the programs that these funds were supposed to be utilized for, especially mental health, trying to make sure that we remind people that those services are out there. We are also in the middle of helping SSM DePaul finish up a grant that they are submitting for the physical health portion. And this is going to be a huge project program that will help this community health-wise, that will have wraparound services. And Dawn and I will be really pushing that out, as well as hand in hand with COVID. You know, the work that we've been doing, trying to get information out for all the stuff with COVID. Dawn's been active doing the COVID clinics. So we have been extremely busy. Lots of presentations to WashU. We're working with several different groups from WashU on several different projects that are going to be coming out. That's really, really cool, that we'll be sharing on our website and on our Facebook pages.
So,
Anybody have any questions?
yeah, so are there any questions for Dawn and Karen? That was a lot of great information. So I would like to know where does the landfill removal stand? I mean, is it in process of being plans for removal, or are they going to bury it, or what's happening?
So where we are right now, they are making plans to actually do the removal. So what they're looking at is which areas to start at. They will not dig deeper into the ground than 20 feet, because that could pose a risk to the community going deeper. And you know, that was the balance that we were faced with. The biggest thing that's happening right now is, as they're looking for different areas to start, they're actually doing additional testing, which is something Karen and I were saying back in 2013. But as they're stepping out of areas where they've already known the radioactive waste is, they're finding this waste all over site. There's not a place they're not finding it. And we actually just had a week before the inauguration, we were called and do a huge phone call suddenly with EPA and DC EPA and administrators, and they kind of, no pun intended, dropped that bomb on us. And it was
Big bomb.
It was, we thought this was a, you know, a transition meeting, just talking about who was staying, who would be leaving. And it didn't turn out to be that way. And I mean, both Karen and I just kind of sat there on a Zoom call and just sobbed, because, you know, for us, even though in our hearts, and really from a scientific standpoint, it's easy to see how this waste is all over the site. It's been there for over 40 years on the surface, subjected to the elements. Of course, it has the ability to move around, but to actually hear it, especially when we fought so darn hard in the beginning, and they looked at us like we were crazy, even suggesting such a thing. And now it was very flippant. Yeah, and you know what? We're finding it in this spot, and this spot. And it was just like, you sucked 5 years out of our lives, and countless times
Fought against us, just fought against us.
Yeah, and here you are so flippantly, okay, you're right. And I guess, I think they thought we would be vindicated and we would celebrate. And I thought, well, why would we celebrate such a thing? What a horrible thing to celebrate. So it just still shows that the way this agency interacts with the public across the nation is just tilted sideways. You know, they really, the communication aspect is, and we're working on helping to fix that in the ways we can, but it needs a lot of work.
Yeah, the agency it feels like the agency has been, I hate to use this word, but brainwashed into the language that they can and can't use for so many years. And we're learning with EPA that that there needs to be some redirection. talking about that phone call and, the administrator telling us that, yes, we have found more waste outside of the area that we originally thought. And, we were both really upset about that. And I can remember Dawn was crying and one of the EPA employees said, well, this shouldn't come to a surprise to you. You already knew this. And it was like, but it's a punch in the gut. It still hurts. It just hurts, and maybe people don't understand that. Maybe it's just Dawn and myself that can really feel that and understand that, but it just really hurts.
There's a thing the agency uses, because I said they have a legal box, right? So when it comes to contamination and toxins, you can find it in somebody's yard, but only if it's above a certain level can they legally do anything about it. So the word that they use is this: if it is found in somebody's yard, and it doesn't matter what it is, it could be lead, it could be radioactive waste, dioxin, TCE, if it is below the level where they can do an action and clean it, they actually call it's an acceptable risk. That is the legal term this agency uses. And, that is one thing that we're fighting. And it's interesting because they are starting to change it. They'll go to say it and then they'll shut their mouth real quick because, that nobody in this world is going to look at their child or even their animal or anybody and say, yeah, you're an acceptable risk. Whoever thought of that term, it needs to go out the window. And so some very simple changes like that really can change the dynamic between this agency and a community. Whereas you're standing in a meeting in a community that has all this toxic waste, it could be across the nation, and you say, well, the good news is that, well, it's there, but, it's not, it's an acceptable risk. And the whole crowd just falls apart. And at that point, communication and the relationship is broken. And as awful as that is, the Environmental Protection Agency is the only agency we really have. And so we do have to work with them. But for Karen and I, when you're highlighting what's broken, we feel like there's that obligation of us to at least offer to help try and fix it also.
Well, we have pushed to help that. We have, pushed to the point where we have to put our differences aside, and it's very, very hard because the same people that laughed at us standing up in meetings and saying, well, yeah, I'd live here, and yeah, there's no big deal, and yeah, it's fine, came back several years later to tell us, yeah, we're gonna have to remove that, it's not fine. But we have put our differences aside, and because, like Dawn said, EPA is the only agency that we have to clean up this mess. And so for us, we have to do something to better this agency, because when we're doing something to better this agency, it's not only going to be better for us, but it's going to be better for other communities across the board. And so that's why we're working really, really hard with DC level EPA to, help the communication of the Superfund program, find changes in ways that really don't cost money. It's language. It's the communication to how you treat people that are, really, really scared, so.
Yeah, Bobby has a question for you. Bobby, go ahead. And then
yes, I'm eating dinner, so my camera's off, but we have studied this issue and we've gone on the tour with you before, and obviously you live there. This is not going to have a short-term solution. But I remember a while ago, and this is probably years ago, there was talk of some sort of buyout, or if you can't fix the land, maybe move the people so they're safe. Whatever happened to that line of thinking? Was that just a pipe dream that went nowhere, or why is that so difficult to grasp? Because it is obviously not safe for people to be living there long term.
That's a really great question. So this is where within the agency, and I'm sure Arthur will have something to say here too about this, this is the bureaucracy, right? This is the part where the way the laws are written and how old they are, they're archaic. In the Superfund and under Circle of Law, you can have one or the other. You can either have a buyout or you can have a cleanup, but you really can't have both. And there have been just a few exceptions of that. And even then, while there might have been a buyout, I wouldn't even call it a cleanup in those examples. And I think because of the regional threat that Westlake poses, should that fire meet the radioactive waste, moving those closest would have solved that issue for them, but it would have done nothing for the region. And, because we were in between that, we ended up getting this. The other thing that happened that, again, this is the really ridiculous part of this archaic law that is being followed. The property owners living within the parameter of the landfill within a half a mile, they were involved in a private settlement with the landfill owner. Had nothing to do with health, only the nuisance and the odor. But because there was a payout, and we don't even know how much because we weren't even part of that, they then could not go back and force that company to then repay those people for their homes, because in a sense that had already happened. They had been given enough to theoretically move from the location. So, their hands were tied, and it was, this is a really important example too. We're not for lawyers or against lawyers in these situations. Justice has to be sought however you can get it, and sometimes it isn't always within the agency. But this is an example of how, you do have to be careful as a community when there is litigation going on. And it's an example of, and I don't know, they may have made the same decision, but certainly they didn't have this information in front of them when they made it about what the limitations of the law were. It wasn't explained to this community like it should have been. And, maybe they would have made the same decision and settled. I don't know. I wasn't part of it, but they deserved to have all the pieces in front of them when they made that decision. And that's, again, that's where this program failed. And frankly, that's where the agency failed them.
Arthur, how's the question for you?
You're on mute.
Okay now. So am I correct, Dawn and Karen, that you've been doing this work for about 8 years now? I'm just curious, other things I've read about other issues, it really seems that private industry has clamped down a considerable amount on the powers of government agencies to regulate. Have you found over the last 8 years or so that it's become more and more difficult to get government agencies to do a proper job of regulating because they are essentially almost bought off by private industry?
The way the deck is stacked, I mean, the cards just keep being added, and it absolutely, I mean, for us, and this is kind of the heartbreaking thing for us, is that, the HBO film really catapulted this issue, but not every community gets an HBO film, right? And that helped turn the tide against the corporations in our favor by highlighting and putting that spotlight on this issue. And that's the hardest thing, right? When you go in a community and they're fighting a corporation and they're doing front groups, because we had one put up against us and paid by the corporation. How do you tell them to combat that? And I think that if I had it my way, because I do think Karen and I see as we're working with these other communities, whenever there's an environmental justice issue, you better believe there's a social justice issue. I mean, they go hands in hand. And if I had it my way, every meeting in one of those communities that the EPA hosts or that are hosted by any entity, they ought to be registering people to vote at those meetings as well, because that's really what it comes down to, right? It's on a local level. It's if you can get a few people from the community, if you can build that core group and then run for a few offices here and there and build that support and pull in your school districts and fire departments. But we've seen communities where polluters have bought off churches and Sunday school teachers. We have
An
actually,
entire community.
we have seen churches destroyed where, you know, part of the board or whatnot was bought off. And then for whatever reason, they all felt guilty and they all stood up in the middle of church one day, confessed what had happened and walked out. And while that might seem like a, wow, some, you know, they lost half a church that day, you know, and this was not a very big community. It was devastating to them. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for our guests? My question, oh, go ahead, Pam.
I wanted to ask if you could give us a little geographical reference of exactly where the radioactive material was dumped. Because is it from Bridgeton to Hazelwood, or what's the range of how this goes and where exactly?
So downtown Malincrot is still there. I don't know if you're familiar with where that is, off of Desterhan, down in St. Louis. But
Now, are we in Bridgeton, or where's that at?
so that is in the city of St. Louis. So it originated in the city of St.
Oh.
Louis off of Desterhan, downtown, right? By
That's
the
where they
river.
were doing the processing.
That's where Malincrot
okay.
started this. And there was enough radioactive waste to fill Busch Stadium, to give you an example of how much this.
Left over.
Mhm. And when it started building up there and people started to notice, they moved it out directly next to the airport. So on the corner of Lindbergh Boulevard and McDonald Boulevard, where Boeing is right now, right there on the right side, it was stored and it just looked like a junkyard. So right there, and that's Hazelwood right there.
Okay.
And that's actually the beginning, that's right there. Coldwater Creek peaks right there out from under the airport. So that is the original source of contamination of Coldwater Creek. And it sat out there, and directly across the street was the Berkeley Quarry League and the ball fields right there. You know, and
Okay.
that's where all of North County went for, you know, all sorts of, you know, sports events. You know, different churches had picnics there. And for a while, that was a public gathering place until it was discovered to have been contaminated. So what ended up happening is the junkyard where this waste was stored in just barrels and all out in the open, eventually that got moved about a half a mile away in Hazelwood off of Laddie Avenue. And from there, it really got into Coldwater Creek. So, and the process of moving it, you know, there were dump trucks used, there were various vehicles used, it was spilled out the back. And so the whole process of moving it contaminated entire roadways by Eva and Frost Avenue.
100
whole
vicinity
area.
properties.
Yeah, there's over 100 different spots within that half a mile parameter of Hazelwood on the border of Berkeley right there that are contaminated just from spilling it while moving it. And then from Laddie Avenue, and that's there's a little place back there now called Futura Coatings. And there was a Wagner break across the street. But that whole area, there were 2-story tall piles of radioactive waste, just raw waste, not even in barrels. And there was no fence. So a lot of the kids from North County, Florissant, Berkeley would ride their bikes, and families would come out and picnic on top of it because it was high up and you could watch the planes land. So
Right.
that is the waste that was, some of it was moved to Canyon City, Colorado by rail. And then the rest of it, including all the contaminated dirt, was moved and illegally dumped at Westlake in 1973.
And that went through Bridgeton, Gist Road.
Right. So
You
that
know-
then was hauled, just like every time this waste was moved by truck, it was done in secret and it was hush hush. So it was just thrown in the back of dump trucks without covers. Some people used pickup trucks. Some people supposedly used station wagons and shoveled this in. So it was just, it was
Some
so
people took it to their
mismanaged.
gardens.
Yep, there were some people in North County because some of it was very rich and dark, and it looked like very fertile soil. So some of them used them in their gardens. They thought it was just a load of dirt, topsoil they were bringing in. And, the way the waste was moved though, and when it sat out next to the creek and with the creek flooding, that is the main way it has gotten out throughout North County. And then at Westlake, when it was dumped, they lied about it and they said it's just dirt. And so the garbage dump owners were excited, and they were like, they use that every day to cover loads of garbage. So
All throughout the landfill.
right. And so as we're discovering now with these additional tests at the landfill, when they dumped this dirt at Westlake, they didn't tell them what it was. And so they treated it just like they would normal topsoil, and it was 3 years later in 1976 that the Post-Dispatch wrote an article, and suddenly everybody realized that it had ended up at Westlake. And by then it had already made its way through the site, and workers were already exposed. And it was, from that standpoint, the federal government panicked. And you can read a lot of these documents where, and I'll be honest with you, I think they knew it was put at Westlake. I think they knew that all along. But there was a big, massive scramble about when to start investigating and what the site actually looked like. And that has continued to even present. That's why we were so emotional in that phone call, because what they're doing now as an agency should have been done in 1976 and could have been done. And it would have been a heck of a lot less expensive then to do the right thing than it is now. And it's, only now it's changed hands at the site so many times that it's not just the federal government. Now it's Republic Services. Now it's Cotter and Exelon. Now there's different entities that are involved and that are going to split the paycheck for cleaning it up. So.
And just to go back to Coldwater Creek real quick, the Army Corps of Engineers is the agency that's tasked to do the cleanup for that area. The creek has only been cleaned up 2 miles of the 9 miles that it is. And part of the reason of that is because of public pressure a few years back, because the creek does flood a lot over the years, and people wanted the parks. There's several parks along the banks of the creek throughout North County, and people wanted their backyards tested. And so they had to stop and do that testing, and they found it in parks, in people's backyards. And, and the other part of that is funding. When they run out of funding for the year, then they stop and they have to wait till they're funded again. And so they have been cleaning up this waste in Coldwater Creek since the late 90s.
Savitri has a question for you ladies.
Okay, I'm sorry, you might hear my children in the background, so she's upset right now with something. So, but sounds like it's like, well, first of all, it's radioactive waste, and sounds like it's just going places without any proper measurement. So I was just wondering, is there, did they keep a track of where all they went or infected anybody in terms of, all those you're saying that children were exposed in different areas, and then it traveled, the people who were handling waste. So did anybody kept a track, or, how many people got radiation related issues?
We don't know that, and that is the heartbreaking thing. Karen and I were gifted some documents from K-Dry that she had, and have been slowly reading through the history from beginning to end. These are all in chronological order. And the earliest they knew that it was in Coldwater Creek was the 1950s. And they still let kids, I mean, just in your head for a moment, do that math. It was like 55, 56. And, and I remember, and I know Karen, we both had a visceral reaction when we were reading this document, because we sat back and we want to punch a hole in the wall. I just thought, oh my God. So that is the real, what you described, at that moment, what you're suggesting should have begun, right? And at that moment, well, the local mayors and everybody should have been alerted, and kids certainly should have been kept out of the creek. They had enough then to know it was dangerous. And I cannot fathom why this never happened. And then from the 1950s, it was like 55, 56, after that, over and over, year after year, you know, St. Louis Health Department, the Atomic Energy Commission, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they kept coming out and looking at all these different sites in North County where this waste was stored. You know, they would have a permit and they revoke a permit and then they'd move the waste like I described. And not once did anybody notify the public. There were a few stories that you would see in a paper, but nobody.
St. Louis remained in the mentality of classified. Being the original processors of this waste back when it was processed, it was highly secretive. And for whatever reason, even when all of the other sites and all the testing sites and everything, all of those became unclassified and public and people were talking about them. If you go back in history or you watch any documentary or you watch any movie, you don't see anything about St. Louis. And it was very, very top secret. And for whatever reason, we have tried to keep that very, very top secret and other issues. But eventually, you know, it couldn't be secret anymore. And as far as how many people have been affected, thousands and thousands and thousands. We know that this stuff is multi-generational. I have several autoimmune diseases that I believe I got from Coldwater Creek ingesting thorium and, you know, uranium dust when it would flood up onto my street and then dry. I would ride my bike and you know, eat vegetables out of gardens there. And, you know, so we know that it's multi-generational, and I see that with my own kids. You know, I have a 3-year-old granddaughter that was born with a mass on her right ovary that had to be removed. You know, I have kids that are sick, and it's a scary thing for both Dawn and myself because you never know when the other shoe's going to drop, especially when it comes to your kids. And, you know, a simple headache is more than just a simple headache for us. We get messages, calls every day from people that are, you know, sick, or, hey, I've got a lump, or, hey, you know, I'm not feeling good. I'm going to the doctor. And sometimes that doesn't end well. You know, 6 months later, we're getting messages from their loved ones that they've passed away. So this has the ability and will continue to affect many, many people. And we always say that we may have won the war, but we were left and we're still fighting the battle here in St. Louis because we continue to see the illnesses. There were some health studies done that were released, and in 2018, there's a fact sheet now that if you grew up or your parents grew up in North County, that you need to take to your doctor. It is from a federal agency, ATSDR, Agency for Toxics and Substance Disease Registry. And it lists, you know, all the things that you should do. Take this to all of your doctors. You know, that is one of the biggest things that we advocate for, because we can't change the history and we can't change the exposure. But Dawn and I try to do everything in our power to get people to do early screenings and preventative health measures and those types of things, because sometimes really that's all you have. And sometimes those types of things will save your life, but you have to know to do those things.
And you have to have access to those things, you know, again, that social justice component. When you're in communities where there's an environmental justice thing going on, you're going to run into socioeconomic and social justice issues that prevent people from being able to have access to healthcare. And that's why our collaboration with SSM, with this health clinic, is really something that we've been working towards. Because for us, you know, the other thing that we're battling, and I think you guys are kind of getting at it, but you know, there's a real mental health component to this too. You know, while I know we're deemed activists, and I get that, and that's fine, but you know, this wasn't something we chose. It kind of fell into our lap. And I think, you know, when you're fighting for the health of your community, but you're slowly watching the health of your kids slide downhill, it's a really a struggle to keep that fight going. And we see this in other communities. There's almost this really, there should be a word for it. There might be, there's almost this idea that as long as you fight and keep going, it won't hit your family. It's like this unspoken thing with God, you know, if that makes any sense. And I know, you know, Karen, because she's already been exposed and is already seeing that and was seeing it even before she knew about the landfill. I think she did and does a better job to some extent. But for me, I fight that because I'm starting to see it with my kids. And I do think that while I knew it was possible, just like the testing at the landfill, I don't know. I think maybe I thought if I fight hard enough and I just give it my all, it'll skip me, you know, even though I knew that that's not how it worked. And so,
Yeah, and all along, you know, we've given up a lot. It's if we didn't have supportive husbands, we wouldn't be in this fight still. You know, when Dawn started, her kids were little bitty, and we were gone from home a lot. And so our husbands were left at home with the kids, you know, helping with dinner and whatnot. And, you know, it's hard enough when I'm already sick. So Dawn has to be the physical one. Dawn has a lot going around in her head sometimes. So I have to be more of the mental one to, you know, processes and analyzes things more. But then you throw a group that was hired by Republic Services to fight against us and to say horrible, horrible, nasty things about us and to try to keep this community depressed and suppressed. And it was horrible. And that is part of this fight that I will be bitter for the rest of my life, because we're trying to save our kids. You know, I wanted to be able to go to bed at night and tell my kids that I fought to the ends of the earth for you. And yes, I'm sorry I was gone away from home, but I'm doing this to protect you and to protect the rest of this community. Just put our community back whole. You know, it's been way too long. It's been way too long that we have been left to suffer, and really there's no reason for it. There's no reason that this continues to linger on. You know, we've got a decision. They're going to clean up the radioactive waste materials out of Westlake landfill, but we still have to watchdog that. We still have to have meetings with EPA, and we still need to make sure that we're keeping the pressure on them to do the things that are in that record of decision that they say they're supposed to do.
Is there any possibility for reparations for these illnesses? I just don't understand how they can say acceptable risk, but the kinds of numbers and people who have come forth with illnesses for generations now.
what I really think it comes down to, and is the historical component of this type of waste, and the fact that it was from the making of the bombs that we dropped on the cities in Japan during World War II. I think there's a real fear that perhaps if we were to calculate and fully tally the toll that the making of those bombs has taken on our nation in terms of health consequences and deaths, you know, maybe it does come out to be such a high number that in our nation's mind, it doesn't justify them dropping the bombs. And I think for Karen and I, we've already reached that, because we've actually, one of the most emotional things we've ever done is met with a professor out of Chicago whose mother was in Nagasaki and actually passed away from lupus. And she has, she takes students, college students there and back, and to speak with some of they call themselves the Hibakusha, the survivors from Japan and the family members. You know, Karen and I thought they would be so angry at us. We thought, my God, you know, we're meeting face to face and we did this to you. And instead it was the pity they had, because they know all about it. They know all about what the making of the bombs that were dropped on their cities has done to our nation. but our own people living in our nation have no idea. And it was just such a moment. And I do think that's the fear of the federal government. It's the fact that the Department of Energy is ultimately responsible for this waste. What we do see happening, and if I could make any prediction at Westlake, and if I could see anything happen besides just the cleanup to go through, I would love to see the Department of Energy take full responsibility for the cleanup and cut that check. And then like Karen said, it's not that Republic didn't hurt us. It's not like they didn't put hit pieces out in Huffington Post and swing at us. But at the end of the day, they were behaving as corporations do. It doesn't excuse it, but our federal government took them hook, line, and sinker at this site, just like it did other communities throughout the nation. There's no way that Republic Services or any other company would have ever purchased this site if the proper testing was done and it showed what it showed this past couple months. There's no way. They would never have assumed that level of responsibility. And the government knew that testing needed to be done. We've got documents where they have said so. So, you know, there's a lot of, I don't even know what you call it. There's got to be a word for it. I don't want to say forgiveness because I don't think you always have, you know, the victim doesn't always have to forgive, but there is a level of acceptance and focus on who the real person is at this site and these sites that can make this situation better. And it's not Republic and it's not Exelon. It's not even Mallinckrodt, really.
Well, thank you, Dawn and Karen, for kind of the update and very comprehensive discussion on this. My question is geared towards you know, advocacy in terms. What would, like, especially for those that aren't you know, up to speed with everything that's going on or want to dig in further, and even those that might, you know, watch this later, what would you ask the public to do to move this forward?
Reach
for
out
you?
to our new administrator, Mike Regan. He's a great guy. He has worked at EPA for years. He worked at EPA Region 4, and he knows exactly what we're talking about. He knows what these communities are dealing with. This is something he has been low level in front of him. And I just think, and this is a respectful ask. This is just, hey, thank you for your focus on climate change, you know, but please, can we do both? You have the ability to do both. Let us help you do both. And, you know, I think, I have no reason to think he would say no. I just think that it's not on his radar. And I just think it needs to be. So, you know, a couple of tweets, emails, even Facebook posts, all that stuff matters. You know, phone calls to elected individuals asking them to ask this of him. You know, his platform is environmental justice. And this fits right in with what he wants to do. It's just, again, there's a place for it that it fits nicely. He just needs to be aware of it.
And you can find all of our stuff on Facebook, Westlake Landfill Facebook group, Just Moms STL Facebook group. We have a website, justmomsstl.org. Dawn mentioned Twitter, we're Just Moms STL. If you get the opportunity and you haven't, watch Atomic Homefront. It will really bring this issue all together and tell the story a little bit better than we give just chops and pieces of it. It does a really good job pulling it all together. So yeah, if you want to email us, you can email us at westlakemoms@gmail.com.
Where can we find the information for Mike Regan that you mentioned? Will that be on your Facebook page? How
Yes.
we can tweet him or, okay.
Yeah, we can.
Yes, we will put up a post with that.
Okay.
Atomic Front is available on Amazon now. I know. So, and it may be on.
Oh,
Netflix.
okay. I know it's still on HBO if you have HBO.
And the name of it again is Atomic
Homefront.
Yes.
Homefront. Okay, great. Well, again, like Carlos said, I want to thank you both for joining our program today. I kind of wanted to introduce myself to everybody. My name is Pam Greer-Hibler, and I am the Advocacy Chair for the United Nations Association of St. Louis. And this has just really been a very informational program, and it's really kind of showed us about the local component of how we can get involved with something this close to home for those of us that reside in the St. Louis area. And if you live in North County, such as I do, this really hits very close to home for you. This local environmental issue is just an example of the sustainable development goals that Carlos talked about in the beginning of our program. If you weren't here when we started, the 17 SDGs were defined by the United Nations to tackle these big problems in the world by 2030. And it's a good way to think of the SDGs in a more marginalized view is the world's to-do list for people and our planet to save it. I mean, because if we take better care, these problems wouldn't have went on since the 1950s, like you guys said. So the SDGs were adopted by 193 countries in 2015, and there's 17 goals that measure our collective progress against the world's challenges, such as environmental issues like these. There are urgent calls for action for the public and private social sectors of the world to come together, more of a global partnership. So we want you guys to, again, reach out to Just Moms and also learn more about the SDGs and how we can bridge this gap. Because this issue tonight of environmental issues really ties in with goal number 6 about clean water and sanitation, which should be something that's a given, not or privilege, and should not be compromised. So again, I encourage you all to take action, get involved, learn more about it. If it doesn't affect you or you don't live in the St. Louis region and just joined our program, still learn about it, tell someone else about this issue. And we hope you will visit our website and our social media and learn more about our other programs that are coming up that we're doing. And thank you all for joining us.
And hey, Pam, if you want to email us, I will send you those health studies.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you can have those to look through and those fact sheets and stuff. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dawn and Karen.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
Bye-bye.
Bye.